Chen is an English MAT student at Stony Brook, from which she received her bachelor's degree and was born in Singapore and now lives in New York City. Her work appears in Prairie Schooner, Bat City Review, the Evergreen Review, and elsewhere, and has been recognized by the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, Young Arts, Foil Young Poets, Plowshares Emerging Writers, the City College of New York, Brooklyn Public Library, and Penguin Random House, among others. Michelle has presented at venues including Lincoln Center, Sotheby's, and National Arts Club, Gold Comedy, the New York City Poetry Festival, the Massachusetts Undergraduate Research Conference, and the American Literature Association Conference. She has attended the Juniper Institute for Young Writers and the Iowa Young Writers Studio with support of the National Society of Arts and Letters. In addition, she is an alumni of Hunter College High School, Girls in Icy Fords, the Adroit Journal Summer Mentorship, and is currently a 3-time AAPI Mentorship Network mentee and Girls Right Now mentee. She recently received the PhD Works Awards for Career Exploration, Fall 2023, and the AAPI Mentorship Network Travel Grant, and thoroughly enjoys being a PhD Career Ladder Program group leader. Observing in high-need schools, making literary criticism exciting, and venturing across time and space with Jill professors and getting less ice and sugar in her winter melon milk tea. You also can follow her collegiate book blog. It's at silkwormreading.blogspot.com. If you guys want that later, I'm sure you can ask either of us. But okay, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll start. After 40 hours awake on Antarctic ice during 6 months of eternal daylight, Elsa Park in Folklorn by Angela Myung-Hur observes her time as a postdoctoral physicist inside the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station to be interpersonally enigmatic, ecologically indulgent, and seemingly expunged of the immigrant traumas that had plagued her family in the Korean Peninsula and the United States. Secluded from a global culture crisscrossed with transnational movement through immigration, adoption, and displacements born from wartime exile, she seeks knowledge and serenity while investigating scientific phenomena as an experimental, not theoretical physicist, capturing enormous amounts of cybersand data. As the team canvasses over the ice, they thrive in dominating and subduing the ecological landscape of engineer-driven snowcats beyond Main Station, raised and lowered by hydraulic jack columns, post-apocalyptic landscapes of retired stations, vintage Korean War-era shelters housing graduate students, and a skeletal steel tower which uses and recycles boiling water to drill holes at 100 kilometers per hour. Elsa's passion for neutrinos, alternatively known as ghost particles born from cataclysmic violence, like supernova explosions, gamma ray bursts, supermassive black holes, and the Big Bang, represents her escape into abstraction through electrically neutral and nearly massless, non-interactive particles which pass through bodies, both human and non-human, into trillions, and have the greatest longevity in geographic travel across time and space. Yet just as neutrinos have never been seen, the ghosts of Elsa's past threaten to bring her out of the preconditions of her belonging within polar ecologies and into the historical and literary realms of the humanities, which she has struggled to escape for their fantastical association with suffering, poverty, and interpersonal destruction. For her, the meditative advancements and dissolutions of modernity are concentrated within multiple enclosures representing polar scenarios of the Anthropocene, eliminating trauma with future-looking scientific progress and optimism expanding across the poles, which can only be an incomplete forgetting of entrenched inequalities of subsistence living, gender-based violence, energy extraction, utility companies built and evicted from unceded land, and industries which pollute, impoverish, and destroy ancestral lands, and violent separation of indigenous peoples from languages and cultures, as Kazim Ali discusses in Northern Light. The advertised faces of indigenous populations in polar regions bring urgency to climate change, yet demean them as holders of valuable knowledge and as populations at risk of losing their ways of life. Arctic indigenous peoples are most often portrayed as exotic, expert, and endangered, furthering Mary Beth Long Martello's statement that victims of disease and disaster often become symbols and spokespeople. Yet I offer that returning agentic roles and exploration narratives to women of color empowers them beyond one-dimensional narratives of exclusion from military and political power into holders of all dimensions of progress, while enacting an active unforgetting of former homelands through imagistic detail and visual and psychological nostalgia sharpened by greater geographical and temporal distances than ever before. However, Antarctica's unique lack of indigenous inhabitants allows Elsa to shape territoriality and citizenship outside of the scope of colonialism, for there is no population to colonize or has ever been colonized here. Elsa thus takes on privilege of claiming the mantle of a self-made empire sovereignty that does not oppress or become oppressed, and allows her to take on the mantle of 21st century global subject in the world's only collectively governed region. During the heroic age from 1897 to 1922, men attempted to conquer the world of polar exploration despite women's desire to attend expeditions and endure masculine hardship, as when Isabel Gunn disguised herself as a man to join an 1806 Hudson's Bay Company expedition, which only restricted white women but allowed indigenous women to be employed as cooks and domestic servants. Ernest Shackleton, known for his Antarctic expeditions, may have refused women despite their desire for adventure due to the idea that the presence of women could diminish a man, where in their absence they may prove themselves worthy of them. Just as Mary Shelley's, Ursula Le Guin's, and Doris Lessing's accounts of polar expeditions mark the presence of the poles in feminist and women writers' dreams, revealing an all-intensive masculine-gendered obsession with exploration and conquest, the material reality of climate change marks greater dedication to advancing polar knowledge, in particular, the differential impact of global warming on women. Currently overlooked in scholarship as a New York Times Best Sci-Fi and Fantasy Novel and NPR Best Book of 2021, exactly a century after women's round of exclusion from the frozen North, Folklorn's inclusion of Asian American women and their counterparts in 21st century scientific discourse prioritizes racialized and gendered intersectionality within the experiential process of healing, but not thoroughly forgetting the past, using natural and man-made enclosures by and for the encroaching ice. Environmental forms of incarceration within the remote wilderness redefine postcolonial and feminist ecologies, where poetics of space, health, and environment evolves intertextually throughout literature to celebrate new positionalities of the model minority myth, where according to Elsa, achievement redeems me, excellence makes me whole, at the expense of resurrecting effective solutions for indigenous multi-generational trauma from residential schools entrenched in both the people and the land. Hur intentionally believes that Antarctica can best set Elsa's euphoric experiences, environmental appreciation, and knowledge hoarding, where hard data and distance lessens her involvement with any social justice issues beyond her own. She escapes into an academic arena that is racially mostly white, streaked with gold, rife with gendered politics, as women negotiate speaking volume and interracial rivalries alongside 5,000 detectors spread out in a single cubic kilometer of ice. These detectors are embedded into 78 ice-drilled holes, collecting data in the world's largest neutrino observatory, IceCube, which is a $250 million collaboration that frequently spurs Elsa's transnational migration and reverts the paths of war refugees into privileged research institutions, including Princeton and Stockholm University, countering ideals of the South Pole as being post-national and post-racial. Cultural differences among American, Swedish, Finnish, and Mongolian scientists highlight the diversification of a new age of discovery, centering the journeys of unconventional and non-normatively gendered protagonists. Polar exploration for women and people of color palpates communal life with disentangled narratives and discursive anxieties, environmental dystopia and utopia. However, everything and everyone here is a non-native species. Intertextuality presents through concise expressive fairy tales, similar to works of Margaret Atwood, Donald Bartholomew, and others, and folklore can additionally be considered as magical realism and technoculture, as well as transgressive fiction in its addressing of taboo subject matters, such as antisocial and mentally ill protagonists, violence, crime, and dysfunctional family relationships. Elsa embarks upon self-discovery to reconcile the duality of science mythology within a highly skilled field, even as she is disturbed by hallucinations of her childhood imaginary friend, for which she utilizes the hands-on tactility and hardware manipulation of experimental physics to ground herself. However, I focus on the narrative's utilization of intertextuality, repetition, fragmentation, and language manipulation from the speechless fright that destroys or divides identity within contemporary literary trauma theory, disrupting all attachments and destroying moral laws and social relationships. Upon her return to her California hometown, father's auto body shop, Elsa's family experiences death, frequent criminal victimization, and cling on to survival within multicultural neighborhoods and hyper-urbanized enclosures, conveying literary effects reminiscent of the fragmented and dynamic spirit of Cubism and Futurism, and the construction of tumultuous family relationships and behaviors. In Sweden, Elsa meets Oscar Gentilius, a Korean adoptee and literature and language lecturer who helps her translate her mother's folktales and replace the pervasive domination between the human and non-human worlds in Antarctic research through his exploitation of other Asian individuals' personal stories. He confesses that he was not the most ethical journalist, as he published intimate confessions in his essays without permission from other Asian adoptees. The instability and untrustworthiness of memory appears when Oscar is adrift between languages, unable to explain or understand feelings, and believing he is losing his mind until he acquired Swedish. He lost friends, trust, lost any right to speak out. He hurt many, including those who had facilitated our adoptions, whom he deemed dangerously naive and simplistic in their idealism. In demonstrating the trauma of lateral violence using stolen confessions as alternatives to statistics, Oscar ultimately realizes he was a coward, couldn't confront my own pain. They recognized themselves, and others did as well. Epistolary elements reminiscent of Frankenstein and Dracula resolve Elsa and Oscar's fractured relationship, as well as their search for his foster mother and her missing sister, written language mirroring the privacy of the ice fields, where trauma can heal through awe and environmental beauty. Thousands of miles away, Antarctic enclosures, including stations, camps, and NASA's prototype hydroponic growth chambers, which import vegetables from New Zealand, highlight how the bone-dry Arctic demands frequent rehydration and intensive technological sustenance of living things, all of which are not from here, and as such, living here is an act of defiance, thriving in a place not meant for us. By contrast, indigenous populations were often forcibly removed, including the World War II internment of Alaska Native people coinciding with the incarceration of Japanese individuals, communities which would never be reestablished in Juneau, Alaska. Juliana Hugh Pughes fills in the missions necessary to the enterprises of the American settler state and its imperialistic expansion for connection between Alaska Natives and Asians in Alaska, where the idea of a land without people, or terra nullius, denied native presence, yet is defied in Hur's Antarctica, which represents the landscape as a piece of rapid ecological transformation, yet populated with close non-indigenous relationships that shape the location as feminine and collaborative. Even as polar region temperatures have risen more than twice as fast as the global average over the past half-century, predicting an ice-free summer Arctic in 2040, where the closest prior existence of this phenomenon was 125,000 years ago, counterintuitively inscribing trauma to American hometowns and interpersonal warmth to polar region society and natural phenomena enriches interpretation of literary works. Folklorn reveals how luscious polar dreamscapes denote appreciation of the natural world as an enduring palliative for the violence and uncertainties of dystopian urbanization, technological development, and modernization. Comparatively, Anna Kavan's final novel, Ice, published at the birth of the modern Anthropocene, establishes how eco-criticism and trauma theory draw closer through intersectionality, demonstrating the transference of trauma into novel glacial landscapes and revealing psychological states denoted by shifting weather systems and environmental catastrophes. Ice exposes the ameliorating effects of enclosures, defined by their intensifications of perception, sexual violence, and post-war innovations in narrative form. Both novels redefine the trauma novel genre, not only through fiction which conveys profound loss or intense fear, but through metaphors of skillful recovery provided by eco-criticism, where the remoteness and beauty of ecological locales and enclosures shape the very meaning and remembrance of trauma. The enclosure not only symbolizes the Anthropocene as a unit of geologic time, where Hur and Kavan immerse unforeseen human protagonists within uncharted landscapes to rehash the lessons of trauma, but redefines a new age of discovery whose fruits of labor manifest in a dialectic of pursuit and escape. The narrator of Ice, along with his rival, the Warden, look down onto a visionary scene through an airfield plane window. The Earth divided into segments of primary color, time fragmented and nebulous. Pass over an array of islands on the sea before encountering a wall of rainbow ice, rolling up the water and threatening to encompass the entire surface of the world. Deadly mountainous walls of ice surround the girl he has been searching for. Narrative enters into Alice Hill Wood's claim that trauma is inherently ecological, even if it attempts to obscure its roots. On the borderlines of science and slipstream fiction, the evanescent, relentless language illustrates the unreality of the woman's body and existence, fragile, mercurial, and elusive, both physically and psychologically. On an abandoned winter road, the narrator drives up and down slopes consumed by hail and snowstorms. My approach to the polar regions extends the facts of the disproportionate impact of climate change on women into further idealizations of the region as a decolonial feminist contact zone for coalitional possibilities which bridge eco-criticism and trauma theory. Trauma studies, the field that came to prominence in the 1990s, involved extreme events and experiences that defy understanding and representation, and reading or listening differently could allow individuals and cultures to move out of imposed isolation by traumatic experience. Listening to another's trauma creates cross-cultural solidarity and new forms of community, yet marginalizes non-Western traumatic events and histories. Ecologies of trauma can thus be applied to both Folklorn and Ice when viewing trauma as a dispersive state inclusive of non-human substances, forces, and beings, and in particular, Beyond Hillwood's claim that Kavan's abstraction of suffering is key to bridging eco-criticism and trauma theory, and into the personification of Arctic elements, which threaten the sanctity of human and non-human life, as symbolic of a vengeful natural world which retaliates against growing economic interests and resource extraction from the polar regions. Ice depicts corrupt international relations and over-militarism against the plot of a vulnerable young woman and those who seek to possess her by any means necessary, terrorized and victimized repeatedly as men rejoice in her suffering through Slipstream sequences. The house was without electricity, observes Kavan, as narrator and male possessor coalesce and later reveals she is dying, which spurs concern in the narrated and only malicious shaded fruit in a possessor who actively intervenes to prevent the narrator and woman from meeting. The home as a traditional enclosure thus fails to protect the narrator from oppressive controlling behavior and environmental decay and neglect. The destruction outside was contagious and had infected everything, including the relationship and the appearance of the room. Even the narrator's life is perpetually in threat within enclosures thought as refuge from the unpredictable and violent natural surroundings. As the narrator drives away, he experiences another optical delusion where the black interior of the house prolonged itself into a black arm and hand, which shot out and grasped her so violently that her shocked white face cracked to pieces and she tumbled into the dark. In becoming a patriarchal, controlling, and dehumanized force, whose increasing tendencies toward maltreatment demonstrate his anthropomorphization into an animalistic, instinct-driven predator, he experiences a form of suffering and degeneration only equivalent with that of the colonized. Soon afterwards, the girl disappears from home, reminiscing his first visit in their living room, where she leaps through the French window into a secret shady garden, a pleasantly cool retreat from the heat of summer. The bucolic setting transforms as dense foliage all around became prison walls, which surge toward her as he sees her terror. A panorama of memories follows in section 2 of the novel, where the woman poses for the man's art with cords attached to her wrists and ankles, movements slow and clumsy from cold, and another day she sits in misery as the man plays a music record to torture her. She throws herself at the record to stop the music, commenting, "You only play it because I hate it so much." Tears spring unchecked from her eyes. She brushed them away carelessly with her hand. Frequently enclosed by an impenetrable wilderness and cold weather, the man observes, fear was the climate she lived in. If she had ever known kindness, it would have been different. The trees seemed to obstruct her with deliberate malice. From a legend which sacrifices a girl to a dragon at the winter solstice, to encounters with warmongers and devastated landscapes, Ice intuitively depicts the Anthropocene epoch through a series of enclosures as units of geologic time when human activity first had a significant impact on a planet's climate and ecosystems. Discovering walls of ice cliffs made fluid by explosions of blinding light so that they moved and changed with continuous liquid motion, advancing in torrents of ice, avalanches as big as oceans, flooding everywhere over the doomed world. The futility of escape from a dystopian world plagued by nuclear warfare and foreign aggression is enhanced by substantial climatic change due to the refraction of solar heat. If the melting Antarctic ice cap flowed over the South Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, a vast ice mass would be created, reflecting the sun's rays and throwing them back into outer space, thus depriving the Earth of warmth. Climatic moments of violence and submission for both the narrator and the woman occur using action-adventure tropes. An environmental oppression through the encroaching danger of the ice, crushing, obliterating, destroying everything in their path. In return, the characters become more treacherous and cruel to match the landscape, as the narrator and warder become mirror reflections of each other in their pursuit and oppression of the woman. He narrates, "I was tied to her. I thought of the ice moving across the world, casting its shadow of creeping death. Ice cliffs boomed in my dreams. Indescribable explosions thundered and boomed. Icebergs crashed, hurled huge boulders into the sky like rockets. Dazzling ice stars bombarded the world with rays, which splintered and penetrated the earth, filling Earth's core with their deadly coldness, reinforcing the cold of the advancing ice. And always on the surface, the indestructible ice mass was moving forward, implacably destroying all life. I felt a fearful sense of pressure and urgency. There was no time to lose. I was wasting time. It was a race between me and the ice. Worsening global conditions increased the devaluation of human life, and as the glaciers close in, the ultimate achievement of mankind would be not just self-destruction, but the destruction of all life, the transformation of the living world into a dead planet. The woman's persecution becomes a metaphor for feminine and indigenous invisibility and oppression, as well as aligning with how trauma studies can break with Eurocentrism through novels that bear witness to the suffering of colonial oppression, revitalizing the ethical potential of the field. Ecologies of trauma can thus be applied to both Folklorn and Ice when viewing trauma as a dispersive state inclusive of non-human substances, forces, and beings. and in particular beyond Hillwood's claim that Kavan's abstraction of suffering is key to bridging eco-criticism and trauma theory. Utilizing representations of anthropocentric enclosures becomes essential for further understanding of polar regions as decolonial feminist contact zones, which resist environmental destruction and imperialistic inequalities through empowerment of previously subordinated and inactive landscapes and peoples, imbuing them with visual and behavioral traits which defy intersectional erasure and forgetting of the imperialistic forces behind climate emergency.